Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in Key West, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair and our indie friends, Book Passage in San Francisco, Gibson's in New Hampshire, the King's English in Salt Lake City, Utah, Left Bank Books in St. Louis, and Pegasus Bookstore in Oakland, California, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Nghi Vo to discuss her new novel, Siren Queen, published by our friends at Tor.com. Nghi Vo is the author of the novels Siren Queen and The Chosen and the Beautiful, as well as the acclaimed novellas When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain and The Empress of Salt and Fortune. She is a Locus and Ignite Award finalist, as well as the winner of the Crawford Award and the Hugo Award. Born in Illinois, she now lives on the shores of Lake Michigan. She believes in the ritual of lipstick, the power of stories, and the right to change your mind. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Rebecca Roanhorse, a New York Times bestselling and Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Award-winning speculative fiction writer and the recipient of the 2018 Astounding Campbell Award for Best New Writer. Rebecca has published multiple award-winning short stories and 5 novels, including her latest novel, the epic fantasy Black Sun. She has also written for Marvel Comics and for television and had projects optioned by Amazon Studios, Netflix, and Paramount TV. She drinks a lot of black coffee. Just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Siren Queen from your favorite neighborhood bookstore. Thank you for supporting indie bookstores everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello
Hello.
and welcome. Here comes Rebecca.
There we are.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing tonight?
Oh, doing pretty good. It finally got warm out here, so I've got the windows open. It's really nice out finally. How are you? Are you in New Mexico tonight?
I am in New Mexico. Yes, we are on fire, so it's a little too warm.
Less nice. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me and joining all of us here. I'm excited to talk about your new novel, which I absolutely loved, Siren Queen. But before we dive into that, I did want to talk a little bit about your earlier works. Of course, the Nebula winning Empress of Salt and Fortune novella, and then your debut novel, The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a Gatsby retelling. Exactly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so when I noticed these books, and of course, also I think the Siren Queen deal with themes of wealth and class disparity and whose story we center, sort of whose story gets told. And so what draws you to these topics? Like, why this story? What inspires you?
Okay. I think it's a great question. And second, part of it was living in Illinois for the first 20, 24 years of my life. And the best thing about Illinois is there's so much going on in it, right? So I come from Central Illinois, which is basically like a pancake except for the Illinois River Valley, like tons of farms, briefly heavily industrial, and then very rural. And at the same time, we have one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, I think, which is Lake County, Chicago. And my family used to go up to Chicago to get groceries when I was a little kid, because that was the only Vietnamese grocery store within any kind of striking distance. And we would drive up Lakeshore Drive, and that makes a big impression on you as a kid. You're like, what's it like living in those houses? And I remember my dad saying, it's really nice. And I'm like, okay, that's about what I needed to know, I guess. So eventually you start wondering about, right. It's like, yeah, nice work if you can get, I guess, unless it's no work at all. I'm still not entirely clear on that. So, you start wondering about the differences, and you start wondering about the contrasts. And, long before any sort of political or social or economic awakening, you start focusing on what you have and what other people have, and a sort of a romance kind of grows among that, especially if you're not
Mm.
careful. There is a romance and a magic to wealth, and that's captivating and that's very interesting. And I've never been able to stop writing about it. So that's a good place. That's as good a route as any, I suppose.
And Hollywood and the Siren Queen is sort of the focus of the story. That's where it takes place in old Hollywood, and that is certainly, I think, we think of Hollywood as American royalty.
We do.
Is that why you chose to write about old Hollywood, or was there some other inspiration behind the story?
To be perfectly honest, I love that idea. I wish I was actually that clever about it, but I'm not. Um, Basically, Siren Queen came about because I was talking with my friend Grace, and she's the person who Siren Queen is dedicated to, as a matter of fact. And apparently, just like one night on chat, completely out of nowhere, I said, "Hey, Grace, you ever notice that like old Hollywood is just like fairyland, where they've got like, people can just take your face, and there's the promise of youth and immortality, and they'll take your name and give you a new one, and they have immense power over you, and decisions are so arbitrary." And Grace is super sweet, so she didn't tell me, "Nee, where's this going? Didn't you want to talk about getting food today?" And no, I wanted to talk about that for the next like 2 to 3 hours. And that's sort of where it came from. It came from the idea that there is this system and there is this world that is so close to the stuff of both dreams and nightmares that have been with
Mm.
us for a very long time. I mean, the promises that are made in places like Hollywood, they're intoxicating, they're enthralling, they're seductive and addictive, especially in the world we live in. You can live forever, you can be beautiful, and everyone will know it. And as you put it, the closest thing that America has to royalty is probably a celebrity,
Mhm.
and we count our worth in fame, and that is so dangerous and so compelling at the same time.
Wow,
Mhm.
nice. I think tend to think of movie stars as people with a lot of power, like we think of like
Right.
Tom Cruise or like people with
Hmm.
that. But really, in this old Hollywood system where Siren Queen takes place, the actors have very little power. Talk about that a little bit, and why old Hollywood versus like not 80s Hollywood or 90s Hollywood. What is it about the old Hollywood studio structure, and maybe explain it a little bit for those who aren't familiar with it,
Oh,
that you found compelling.
um, okay. So the idea, the movie industry has not been with us very long at all. 100 years and some change, if that, basically. And what you're starting from is a playing field that is very different from even the Hollywood that we know today. You're starting from a position where there were no such thing as credits, for example. Old movies have no credits at the very end of them because they originally thought, who would care who these actors are? They were disposable. They were moving parts for this brand new machinery of cameras and eventually light and sound. And that shows a certain amount of power imbalance. Let's start with that. And as it goes further, what you end up getting is actors who have what someone a lot classier with me than me might call a movable feast of background, where the studio would just give you these wonderful stories about who you were and where you came from. For one movie, you'd be a Hungarian countess. For another one, you'd be a girl from Minnesota, right? And no one really had a problem with that. It was just really fun ad copy for the movie. And did anyone believe these? Maybe, maybe not, but it was just part of this story. And Siren Queen, in a lot of ways, comes from a time when actors were basically just graduating from being props. There was this idea that they were interchangeable, and then we were just getting into the idea of megastars. Valentino, one of our very earliest celebrities, the great Latin lover, the man who, when he died, had thousands of people following his death train. That was I think that humans at that point, and I'm still not sure we are ready for that kind of celebrity, a face that is that well known and that we then communally grieve after they're gone.
Mm.
And sometimes I watch movies, I read blind items, and I kind of wonder if anything has changed. The power of a movie star, the idea of a bankable movie star is one thing, but Hollywood just like publishing, just like a lot of other industries, runs off a lot of much smaller players. And I've sat in on contract negotiations. I've paid attention when other people talk, and that power, I hate to say it, it feels very illusory sometimes. It feels like a mirage.
Yeah,
And yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
And I have had a toe in Hollywood for a while, and
Oh,
it
right.
felt
Yeah.
very real. Like, I think you really nailed it. So I just wondered, did you do research? Did you go out to LA? Did you like interview any studio execs, or is this just all sort of your imagination and your own storytelling?
Actually, I quickly realized that a lot of the Hollywood that I was trying to portray in the Siren Queen, except for in the remnants and the skeletons of the power structures, the vast inequalities, the remnants of Orientalism, racism, misogyny, all of that, uh, it doesn't exactly exist in the same particulars. The places are gone. A lot of the buildings are gone. I would have liked to go see some of the buildings. Um, but the biggest tool that I had available to me were the biographies. Like, and they're fantastic. They're so big, and we've had this effect, and I've kind of wondered about it off and on. If the idea of influencer culture and the idea of anyone can be famous on the internet, I kind of wonder if that has shrunk celebrity to a certain way. We want to invite people into our lives and into our homes, and before that, we have these old stars, and there was no way to know them because the world was a lot different back then. And you have these people painted in like 10 feet high in silver, and they're magical, and they're gods, and they're spirits, and you can never ever touch them. And I feel like that's something the biographies really really pushed really hard. You can't read a biography about Marlene Dietrich and not feel that she was just bigger than life. Same for Greta Garbo, same for Valentino. um, these are people who lived their lives, and our records for them are so strange they have to be nearly mythical. And it's the best kind of story if you want to start talking about how big emotions can get and how big ambitions can get, I think. um, Also, I started looking up a lot of like Hays Code laws. They came in, and I'm like, okay, these laws had to be this rule had to exist for a reason. So I just took everything in the Hays Code, and then I just blew it back up in reverse for how the movies ran in Siren Queen.
And for those who don't know what the Hays Code is.
Oh, the Hays Code is a sort of partially self-inflicted, partially created due to the pressure of the moral rights in about 1934. They were a list of things that American movies would no longer portray. This was a long list of things they considered morally degenerate to the soul of America. So basically, no smoking, no drinking, sex work is punished, queerness is punished, no such thing as an interracial relationship on the screen any longer. And the really interesting point is, we really love the idea of progress being linear. We've become more free over time, and that's an illusion. That's a history book's illusion. And part of it that was very interesting was before the Hays Code, which is when Siren Queen takes place. We have a world where you could have queer people. They might be a sort of caricaturized picture, but you did have them. Design for Living, which beat the Hays Code ban by about, I think, like by about 9 months, was more or less a threesome relationship. Two men and a woman who end the movie, who end the comedy very happily, and deciding that the three of them are going to be making a go of it. And then that was entirely gone the next year, and that was what the Hays Code is.
Wow.
Mm.
So I have to ask, talking about sort of biography and ambition and all of these things, you certainly have a compelling protagonist in your story, the Siren Queen. But she doesn't start that way. She doesn't start as a queen. So tell us a bit about your protagonist.
Okay. I lucked out is essentially what I did. Like I never expect this to happen again. So I told you about how the basically the setting for Siren Queen came about, and it is compelling. And I think that as much as we might love a world, you can't really do anything with it until someone shows up, right?
Mm,
Yeah,
right.
you can have this amazing world, and I'm like, okay, so, and Siren Queen is my first novel. It's the first novel I've ever really finished. So I'm like, okay, someone is obviously watching this. Who is seeing this? And basically, right after I asked that question, um, Luli literally shows up in my head with more or less the first line of the book, about all the stories that Wolf Studios has told about her, and very quickly saying, "Well, of course that's bullshit." I'm like, "Hi, nice to see you. It's lovely to see you. Have a seat, I guess." And it has never happened like that again, ever. So that's where Lily comes from. Lily comes from a lot of biographies I read about Asian American actresses at the time. She comes a bit from reading about the Forbidden Palace, which is it's an entertainment hall that shows up in San Francisco. It shows up in Siren Queen as well, and from the entertainers who were just trying to make it work during the time period. So she comes from a lot of different places, and she was just so much fun. I hope everyone can tell how much fun I had writing her, because it was so much fun.
Oh, she's such a badass. I love her to death. I mean, she's pretty ruthless,
I'm
and
so glad to hear you say that. Like, it's I was like halfway through Act 2, and I'm like, you're kind of mean, aren't you? And I'm like, and she's like, thank you for catching up, basically. No,
she's
it's
definitely a woman who knows what she wants and
she
is going
does.
to do what it takes to get it. Um,
Just
you
a little
know,
blackmail.
yeah. Well, it's a little blackmail between friends or enemies. Um, so when we meet her as a little girl, and
Mhm.
she falls in love with the movies. So have to ask, what is your relationship to the movies? Is any of that sort of reflect your life? And what are your favorite movies? Or do you have black and white favorites, contemporary favorites? What is it that you look for when you go to the movies?
Oh man, okay. So actually, to me, movies they're pure magic in many ways. I mean, I still remember the first movie I ever went to. I was a little kid, and it was I think it was like the Dollar Theater in my hometown.
Mm.
And that feeling when you walk into a movie theater from like a hot summer day or hot summer night, depending, and there's just this climate shift as you walk in, and you're freezing, and it sort of gives you goosebumps. And then you're sitting in the dark, and then the lights go down, and then the screen goes up. And I mean, I don't even remember, I think, what movie it was, but I remember that feeling sitting there. So there's part of that. Part of it is the wonder of the fact that certainly not the marketing or production of a book, but the writing of a book is wonderfully lonely. I am all by myself, and I'm entirely in charge in a way I seldom am of anything else in my life, right? And movies, I'm like, how do you make that many people do all of that and run in one direction at once? And it's completely befuddling to me. Like, music is the same way. I'm like, really, you have like three people in a band and you can just make them do stuff together? That sounds like a lie, but okay, whatever. I see there's a whole industry based off of it. So they're magic. They're magic. I don't understand how it works. I don't understand how you get that many cats herded. And when it comes to favorite movies, probably pretty relevant is the fact that I remember watching Queen Christina, which is one of Greta Garbo's movies, where she plays the cross-dressing queen of Sweden from the 1600s. And
Mm.
I remember so little about the plot of the movie, but I remember first how good Greta Garbo looked in a doublet, essentially, in trousers. She looks great. There's this one moment, and seriously, she looks fantastic. And there's this one moment where she puts her hands on the face of her maid and just leans in and gives her a little kiss. And I'm like, something is happening here, and I don't know what it is, but it's happening like right here. So there's that. Designed for Living, as mentioned, from 1934, 1933, which is about three kind of mean-spirited but hilariously funny people trying to make a go of it in a very difficult world. When it comes to some of my favorite movies that are a bit more current, Interview with the Vampire from the
Mm.
90s, because okay, this is weird, but they let me into a theater to watch that when I was 13. And I'm still kind
Mm.
of wondering how that happened, because it wasn't like I had parental permission. I'm like, I just walked in, bought a ticket to see the pretty vampires, and I'm like, what happened? And let's see, more recently, Crimson Peak, because
Mm.
it's not real love unless you're in love with a terrible house that's falling down on you. because that's what love is, right?
Exactly. So, what those have in common, and certainly you mentioned before, is magic.
Yes.
Movies themselves as magic. And magic, of course, plays a huge role in Siren Queen. Um, Tell me a little bit about your world of magic, or I think there's two philosophies, I think,
Mhm.
among sort of like fantasy writers, that magic has to be a system, very systematic, and this is the way it works. And then there are writers who are a little more like, wave your hand, like magic over here, it's ephemeral, it's not comprehensible because we don't understand magic, right?
Mhm.
So which do you prefer, and which do you think you sort of lean to in this novel?
Well, okay. So I definitely lean towards the second because I mean, I think about the way that magic is power and electricity is power, and I cannot tell you how electricity gets into my house. I know how to reset a breaker, I know how to change a light bulb, but I can't rewire a house, right? It's not a skill set I've ever picked up, although maybe someday I would like to learn. Um, and that's about where I like to keep it. That's a place that's very comfortable for me. That's the way fairy tale magic works. Like there are rules
Mm,
in fairy tales, and we don't know them, but if you grew up with them, you feel them. Why
mhm.
do you always give a random talking animal the last bit of cheese you have? Why is it always the youngest of three who manages to beat the witch? Why does the witch always have to die?
Mm.
And there's certainly a big element of that. I mean, the really funny part was not terribly long ago. I was talking with my friend who I think she was like looking at a house, and the thing she told me was the electrician turns to her and says, "Okay, you see this house? You see these four nails here?" And she's like, "Yes." And he says, "You see how this is how the house is grounded. All the electricity in the house is grounded to these four nails they put in the wall." And that's, yeah, you see, that's terrible. And that's what
That
magic can
sounds
also
bad.
be. It's like I don't know exactly what this all means, but I know it is bad, right? And some of
I
it is the
love it.
fact that I've never had a character, either Luli or Jordan from the Chosen the Beautiful, who has cared about magic systems or how like they're neither of them are characters who understand how electricity works. And I figure that's how they are about magic too. I mean, I put some work into it, and they're like, I don't care. I'm like, great. Just imagine me throwing a notebook over my shoulder. It's fine. It's fine. Let's just keep on going with the plot.
Awesome. So you did mention fairy tales.
Hmm.
The Siren Queen, the magic in it does seem very inspired by the Fae. So not
Hmm.
just like fairy tales generally, but sort of the Fae, the fairy. There is, I don't want to give anything away in the book, but there is a wild hunt across sort of the lot of the studio, which is slightly terrifying, actually. The magic in this book is ephemeral and dark, but also incredibly scary. Like it feels very real, very visceral. So talk a little bit about why you wanted to write about the Fae. What was it? You mentioned, Hollywood did have sort of this uh, evil bargain, or, sort of careful what you wish for feel to it. Is that what brought the Fae onto the studio lot?
There's there was actually a lot that went into it. Some of it was just that first revelation of the exchange of names, the promise of immortality,
Mm,
eternal beauty, youth, all that fun stuff. Some of it was the bargains, because one of the things that's always struck me from reading both fairy tales and ballads, and especially some of like the border ballads from the 1600s, there is just this dark world that lives just a little bit below where we can see. And the thing is, it's not distant enough that it can't hurt us. It is there's always something nasty under the surface around the corner, waiting behind a job interview, brought into your house by a younger sibling or an older sibling or parent.
mm,
Um, the world is the world is full of monsters. I think I've always believed that. And it's important to remember that monsters most typically wear human faces,
mm,
and they're us, and they're not us, and we don't want them to be us, and we know that they're us at the same time, which is a lot of what Lily is both embracing and rejecting as she kind of just barrels her way through life. um, and for me, I think the biggest intersection of where fairyland hits Hollywood is just the beauty and the enchantment and the irresistible urge to put your hand in a fire. It's okay. So I don't know if this is a little too revelatory, but there's every now and then I just end up really staring hard at like a candle flame, and it looks like the coolest thing to touch. And I know it's not because I'm 40 years old and I've learned better by now. But my brain tells me, my brain literally tells to me, put your finger in that. That probably feels really cool. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Right.
Absolutely.
And then, but there's still that compulsion in there. The compulsion, like another one that gets me sometimes is sometimes I'm standing by like a large body of water, and I live near Lake Michigan. This is a real problem. I want to like just take off my shoe and just fling it in. Don't, why would I do that? And it's compelling, and it's sort of all wrapped up with fairyland and the urge for me to just have to limp home with one shoe because I'm not throwing the other one in. That would be foolish, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
compulsion, even though we know better. And I feel like there are so few things that can make your brain do that. And what the hell is going on over there? And that's part of my urge to try to pull it apart a bit.
That's so cool. I have to tell you, I used to live in Venice Beach, like in Los Angeles.
Oh yeah,
And it's very compelling to want to walk into the sea. And I have no
right.
idea what that is, especially when the tide is out and it seems like you can walk out. I remember it'd be like pitch dark. And it's so, you just like, let's just walk into the ocean and see what happens. You're like, you know what
You know
happens?
what's
You
going to
die.
happen. You know exactly what's going to happen.
I know
And
it's not
yet,
going to be good. And yet
no.
your brain is like, just try it. Just try
Just
it.
try
You
it.
know?
Let's do it.
I don't know if that's just
Well,
fantasy
do you
writers.
know? Do you know for sure? And it's like,
Yeah.
yes, I do. You know what I'm
Absolutely.
talking about, right?
Yes, yes. So I do want to encourage folks who are listening to ask questions. There's a little ask a question button down at the bottom. We will start taking a look at questions here in just a second. So please put them in there and I will look through them. Until then, we're going to keep talking. So you mentioned well, we both did, talking about compulsion and putting your hand into the fire. You do have this motif of bonfires in the story, which are sort of these, I don't know, like sort of these little clubs or something that people who roam the studio at night stay inside the light because out in the shadow, something terrible can happen to you. But each bonfire is sort of ruled by whoever the hot star is at the time. Talk a little bit about that because they're very. I don't know. They were very both like, "Ooh, I would like to go to the bonfire," but then I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, well, maybe not. I don't know. I'm kind of freaked out."
Oh, yeah, no, it's so the Friday night fires are essentially the places where the kings and queens of Hollywood hold court, and what they come from is I mean, there's the idea of harvest fires. I grew up in the Midwest, so the homecoming bonfire is an old tradition. If your school was very interested in football and that whole culture there, of course. And some of it comes specifically from my memories of high school drama rap parties, right?
Mhm.
You've it's If you've ever done drama, you know exactly the kind of party I'm talking about. You've basically got like a bunch of teenagers hopped up on excitement and hormones and probably some alcohol they shouldn't have, and you let them have a party to blow off the steam of pretending to be other people for a weekend or a week. And they're terrible. Like, there is always someone on the steps crying their eyes out. There's always someone, usually me, holding someone's hair back. There is someone making out, and bad choices are being made, and bad choices are being courted, and bad choices are being turned down. It is all part of the experience. And they were amazing. They were wonderful. They were dangerous, like you said, in many ways. And I would not go back if you paid me, right? They're terrible places, and you cannot be in them for too long. And that's part of what the Friday Night Fires represent, both in the story and to me as well. They're they are the intersection of beauty and danger and fear, and the kind of wonder at what you could become if you're brave enough, and the
Mhm.
seduction of that and the danger of that as well. How about that? That's kind of what I got.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, this whole book is very seductive. I think this world that you paint, it is. It's very much like you want to be part of it, but it's sort of terrifying too. Anyway, we do have a few questions, so I'm going
Oh,
to
sure.
sort of shift gears a little bit and see what we have. Okay, from Megan, she asks, as someone whose favorite book has been The Great Gatsby since I first read it at age 12. Oh, go Megan, you did your
Yeah.
reading. I didn't read. I was like, 25. I cannot get over how beautiful a retelling The Chosen and the Beautiful is.
Oh,
How the changes you made to the existing story in terms of race and queerness and also magic fall so perfectly in line with and enhance the original telling. What was your thought process behind the world building? In particular, how did you decide on the magic used, such as the paper cutting?
okay. So, I'm with you actually, Megan, because I really loved The Great Gatsby when I read it. I read it when I was like I think a sophomore in high school, and the best thing about it is how big it feels. Like I think that's a great reason to give it to high schoolers, as well as the fact that it's so short. It's 40,000 words, and I think at that age, we really remember, we really feel how big everything is. It's the first time you fall in love, the first time you get your heart broken, the first time you realize that these people around you, they're not really your friends, right? And that's a lot of that came into writing The Chosen and the Beautiful. Some of it came with with the research I did into the concepts of advertisement and electricity, because at the time of The Great Gatsby, we have our cities lit up with power. We have light all around the clock. And we still have rural places that are not going to get running water or electricity for practically another generation or so. Um, so, what kind of world is that? And what kind of world are we looking at where advertisement is just beginning to get off the ground, right? Because advertising was brand new. Now it's this thing that gets in the way of me trying to listen to things on YouTube. And back then, it was this brand new thing. No one had ever looked at everyone and said, do you know what you can buy if you only have the money? And that's very seductive and it's very, very attractive. And it was new. And that's what kind of went into how magic works in The Chosen and the Beautiful. It is want, and a lot of times it's infernal, because the things we do to get what we want, I think that determines us, that tells us who we are even more than what we want. It's what we'll do for it, you know? And that's kind of where I came from writing Jay Gatsby, where I came from writing Jordan Baker. And it sort of just sort of snowballing until I eventually had a book. And that's kind of how the beginning and the end of that, if that's any help at all.
Nice. Okay, we have a question from Casey Davis. They ask, did you find any actor that fell from grace from Hollywood past with the same fallout like from Hollywood today? With the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, for example. Oh, contemporary issue.
Basically,
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's there's a price to fame, and there's a price that is incurred when we make people so big. There are a lot of old Hollywood scandals. The better documented ones are from the 40s and 50s. So if you're interested, that's a great place to start, especially because the machine is just starting to get rolling about then. Like the machine as we recognize it, Before that, we had the fun of Lavender Marriages, which is where queer actors would marry each other to present a more family friendly front. There was at least one actress who got pregnant out of wedlock, and then was, after she was properly married, was able to adopt her child back, that's a dark thing for a studio to be able to force you to do. There was Rita Hayworth, who had surgery to sort of make her features more Caucasian. Let's start there. There was Mae Wong, who was basically both loved and reviled for some of the roles she took. There's no safe place to stand if you were in the position she was in, for example. There was the Fatty Arbuckle trial, which sort of ended his public life, as a matter of fact. But we have always been people, and we have always been awful. And the minute you give someone any sort of power, they will start to use it in terrible ways, I think, unless they're very careful. And it's all there. This is nothing new. We were just seeing it.
It's just more prevalent, I think, with social media. It's just that we, like you said, we just see it now. It's always
we
around.
We see it, and we get to comment on it, and we get to influence how other people think about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to read actually a quote from the Siren Queen,
sure,
which I thought was just your prose, by the way, is just gorgeous. And I'm going to ask you a little bit
Thank
about your
you.
process, but first I'm just going to like fangirl.
Oh,
Um, so it says, and this is probably in like the last third of the book, so hopefully it's not too spoily, but
mm,
you say, I saw it then, or rather I saw Emmeline Savignon. Emmeline Savignon was the woman all the little girls should want to be, the one all the boys should want to, fuck, I hope I can say that, I don't know. She got top billing and she earned it by being their perfect, untouchable dream. I got to be the monster, and I earned it by being a monster, foreign, foreboding, and poisonous. Woo! You know, as a woman of color, I totally felt that. So, talk a little bit about uh, your character as the Siren Queen, as she comes to be. And I don't want to get too spoilery,
of
but this
course.
idea of embracing the monster and what that means.
Here's this thing. Like I had to think a lot about monsters as I was writing this story, both, the ones that menace us and the ones we are. And the first thing I found out, I think, is that it is easy to be a monster. It is easy to have the whole world look at you and say, yeah, that's a monster. It doesn't take much. You can do it by being a woman. You can do it by not being white. You can do it by being queer. You can do it by being disabled. It is just not hard, right? And it really, you know what I'm talking,
Mhm.
it's true. It really is true. And what it comes right down to at the end of it is, um, you can take that word and you can decide and your only choice is you don't get to stop being a monster. You just get to decide how you're going to deal with it. And that's what Lily does. She, I mean, it's only a spoiler because it's the tagline, but Lily sets her own rules. She says, no maids, no fainting flowers, no funny accents. And so the studio looks at her and says, what's left? And she's like, okay, well, this is my only choice. And I'm going to own it. I'm going to be the best monster that you have ever seen. And she is. And that's why she's one of my favorites. And it puts her in an interesting contrast to Emmeline, who is, um, basically her foil in just about every way that matters, and also briefly her lover, and so on and so forth. And what it is Emmeline is perfect. And here's the thing about being perfect is if you're perfect, you can't change. And that's
Mhm.
terrible. That is a fate worse than death. Because the minute you're not perfect, you're a monster. And if you're perfect, you get to see how they treat monsters. And that's terrifying. And that's why I can never be that angry at Emmeline at all. I tried for a while, but you can't be. I know Lily's very angry with her for quite some time, but that's Lily.
And so one of the things, talking about Emmeline is one of the things that populates this story is all these wonderful, amazing secondary characters. Um, Greta, I think of Harry, Tara, and they're really fully realized. And I really became attached to them, and I wanted to hear
Oh,
their stories as well as Lily's. I wanted to know sort of how they came to be who they are. So, how do you approach writing secondary characters? You said that Lily just kind of moved in and made herself known. What about these people around her, sort of these satellites?
let's see. Greta is basically all of my feelings about Greta Garbo stuffed
Mhm.
inside a girl who used to have a cow's tail before they amputated it. She is every iota of power being, I don't care about this. She came from my sort of teenage infatuation with the idea of Greta Garbo saying very famously, I want to be alone. The only thing she wanted was to be alone, and pretty difficult when you're a movie star. Let's put it that way. And let's see. Harry is for me imagining a kinder ending for Ramon Navarro, who was meant to be the next Valentino and met a very dark end one night.
Mhm.
And that was me saying, I need something better for this man.
Mhm.
And um, Tara's a writer, which is kind of a loaded thing for a writer to be writing about a writer, right? Like, there's this point when Lily says to her, she's like, "Do you write who writes your lines?" And Tara says, "I can reliably say I write all of them." And that's what Tara is wrapped around. Tara is this observer who is not really a part of things, but one of my litmus tests for a lot of the secondary characters is, could I write a book about them? If the answer
Hmm.
is yes, I'm probably somewhere close to home. There's probably a really fun book out there about Tara in Chicago. There's a really fun book about there about Greta and what she calls my little Hollywood interlude, which is all she really wants to say about it. I mean, I just think of my own friends and my own loved ones in my life and how complete they are and how big they are, and how I think in real life we have to kind of share the spotlight. Basically, we can't, if we think of ourselves perpetually as the main character, we're missing out on so many cool and interesting lives. So, I love being a main character, but I also really love being, basically my best friend's comedic sidekick, or, like, someone who actually does say smart things briefly. And it's a very big part for me. Mostly I do much better as comic relief. So,
yeah.
but I mean, I just think of my friends, and yeah, everyone is a complete person.
Well, they're wonderful characters. You're definitely on track. They could write their own books for sure. We just have a few more minutes, so if you do have a question, please pop it in now, and I will try to get to it before we run out of time. But I did want to ask you, sort of, what are you currently reading? I always like to know what other authors are reading, sort of what inspires them, what gets them excited.
Okay, right now I'm reading this book on anatomical Venuses, which are these sort of wax figures from about the 1700s and the 1800s. And they were like anatomical models that were made to be as close to the real thing as possible. And so they're made out of wax, and they were made in these enormous warehouses, oftentimes in Italy, sometimes in France. And why wouldn't you make a weird anatomical model whose heart and lungs you can lift out? Why wouldn't you make that into a beautiful woman? And that's a really good, creepy question, as a matter of fact. So they're like saints. They're like they look like sleeping women, and some of them have real hair wigs, and you can just open them up and you can see their wax hearts and their wax ribs. Some of them were meant to be, they're meant to be sort of educational. So, some of them have like a fully developed baby inside them that you can lift off their stomach and see. And it's really freaking eerie. It's creepy and wonderful, because you know how wax has the translucence that flesh does, kind of like marble does. And you look at them, and it's very, very easy to let your brain do that sideways slip where they look like people. Yeah. And then suddenly the chests are lifted off, and I'm like, okay, this is fine. This is fine. I need to stop reading these before I go to bed. And that's what I'm reading about right now.
Wow. Well, so do you think there's a story in there?
Oh, definitely. There's a bunch of them. Just like there's a bunch of organs in the one I was just looking at earlier.
Excellent. Which brings me to
inside us.
Oh, well, wait. More questions came in. Let me see if I can get to those. Oh, no. Wait, my browser is acting up. Okay. Let's see. Oh, goodness. What's next for you? Which is my next question, too. So thank you, DJ.
Okay, so Singing Hills 3 Into the Riverlands is coming out in October. There's another Singing Hills coming out the year after that. I just finished up writing a novella that is sort of like the distant sequel to Chosen the Beautiful, which is called Don't Sleep with the Dead. I had a novel that I think sort of fell apart on me a little while ago there, so we're not talking about that. And I'm currently writing Singing Hills 4, and okay, yeah, I think that's it. I think we're good.
So not much, right? You're not very busy.
Not much. No, I'm okay. I'm just hanging out. I'm just writing. I'm just writing my fanfic. It's cool.
Fair enough. Yeah. And then let's see. DJ also asked, are either of you signing or personalizing either of your books? I would like a signed copy. Oh, are you signing books anywhere, Nghi?
Not really, but I think if you ask Tor.com, they can tell you where some of my signed books went. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I'm not sure where they are now.
And you can buy my signed books either through Beastly Books in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is actually owned by George Martin. So that's a lot of fun. Or through Poison to Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, wait, Boswell. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just realized Boswell Books has some. I just signed some for them. So Boswell Books in Milwaukee has some.
There you go, Boswell Books in Milwaukee.
Yes.
We have about 30 seconds left. So maybe we'll invite our host back on to sort of wrap us up.
Yes, here I am. So do either one of you have a copy of the book that you can hold up to the screen?
Oh, no, mine's in a Kindle.
No, sorry.
Shoot. Okay, so I gotta ask you about that beautiful book cover.
No, it's really gorgeous. I promise.
Oh my
It's
God.
Tor.com did an amazing job.
It's gorgeous. Did you have anything to do with that, or was it Tor.com?
Absolutely not. It was absolutely Tor.com. It's like every time they show me my own book covers, I'm like, wow, that looks like a real book. And they're like, did you have anything else to say? I'm like, mm-mm.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
It's Christine Foltzer is the art director at Tor.com, and she knows a lot more than me about art, and she makes good calls.
Beautiful, beautiful. So thank you so much. That was an amazing conversation. And thank you for joining us. Thanks to our bookstore partners out there, to Miami Book Fair, to all of you for watching and reading. And I hope that you will order this book from one of us, or from all of us, one of each. So thank you for joining us. And I just wish you the best of luck with this journey with the book. And I hope we'll see you again soon. Maybe in person for Miami Book Fair, maybe sometime in November. Intriguing. Anyway, thank you so much for everything. All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.